Friends, brothers, sisters, seekers of truth, have you ever woken up to a morning that felt like endless twilight? Have you ever looked in the mirror and seen a stranger staring back, someone you no longer recognized, someone utterly lost? Have you ever felt the cold, suffocating blanket of despair cling to you so tightly that you struggled to breathe, struggled to believe, struggled to even hope? Today, we are going to embark on a profound journey, a 4-hour expedition into the heart of human struggle, and more importantly, into the boundless, unexpected power that can break through even the densest darkness. This isn't just a story I'm telling you, it's a testimony, a deeply personal account of a life consumed by shadow, a life that believed itself beyond redemption, a life that had given up. But listen closely, for in this very abyss, a light appeared, a light not earned, not deserved, not even sought. It is the story of the day grace found Sarah in her darkness. And I promise you, by the time we finish this journey together, you will understand that no matter how deep your personal night, no matter how lost you feel, grace has a way of finding you. So, settle in, open your hearts and your minds, and prepare to discover the incredible truth that even in the deepest night, dawn is possible. Now, to truly grasp the monumental impact of that day, the day grace found Sarah, we must first understand the absolute, bone-chilling cold of the darkness she was enduring. This wasn't just a temporary setback, or a period of sadness. No, this was a sustained, profound, and all-encompassing spiritual winter. It was a season of the soul where every leaf of hope had fallen, every stream of joy had frozen over, and the very ground beneath her feet felt barren and unyielding. Sarah had made choices, oh yes, she had made choices that chipped away at her spirit, eroding her sense of worth, and leaving her adrift in a sea of regret. She had chased fleeting pleasures, sought validation in empty promises, and allowed bitter disappointments to fester into deep, festering wounds in her heart. She woke up each morning with a hollow ache in her chest, a sense of dread that clung to her like a shroud. The world outside her window seemed vibrant and alive, full of bustling activity and genuine laughter, but for Sarah, it was all muted, a distant hum she could barely perceive. She felt like a phantom, walking through life, unseen and unheard, even in a crowd. Every effort she made to connect, to simply be present, felt like an immense performance, an act of sheer will that left her utterly drained. She tried to smile, to nod, to pretend, but inside, a relentless storm raged, tearing at her soul. The darkness wasn't merely external circumstances, it was an internal landscape, etched deeply into her very being. It was the constant whisper of self-condemnation, telling her she wasn't good enough, that she was fundamentally broken, that she had gone too far down a path from which there was no return. The weight of her past mistakes pressed down on her, stealing her breath, crushing her spirit. She felt like she was carrying a backpack full of heavy stones, each one representing a regret, a missed opportunity, a broken promise. And she believed, with every fiber of her being, that she deserved every single one of those stones. I remember Sarah telling me about moments when the idea of simply getting out of bed felt like lifting an impossible weight. The thought of facing another day, with its predictable cycle of internal torment and external pretense, was overwhelming. She would lie there, 4 hours sometimes, staring at the ceiling, the silence in the room punctuated only by the frantic beat of her own anxious heart. The sun would rise, painting the sky with glorious colors, but Sarah saw only gray. The promise of a new day was a cruel mockery to her weary soul. Her relationships suffered profoundly. How could they not? When you are drowning in your own despair, it's difficult to reach out, to truly connect. Sarah became withdrawn, guarded, pushing away the very people who loved her most. She built invisible walls, not to keep others out, but to keep her perceived ugliness in. She convinced herself that she was a burden, a drain on anyone who dared to get close. The loving words of friends and family sounded hollow to her ears, unable to penetrate the thick barrier of her self-loathing. She chose isolation, convinced it was her deserved punishment, her rightful place in the shadows. And her spiritual life, which had once been a source of genuine solace and direction, had completely withered away. Prayer felt like an empty ritual, a meaningless recitation of words. She avoided places of worship, feeling like an imposter, stained by her perceived failures. The hymns that once uplifted her now sounded like indictments. The stories of redemption, of grace, of second chances that were preached from pulpits now seemed like distant fairy tales, meant for others, for people who hadn't fallen as far as she had. She truly believed she had strayed beyond the reach of any divine intervention. This darkness was not an overnight phenomenon, it was a slow, agonizing descent. It was a gradual stripping away of her joy, her purpose, her very identity. Each wrong turn, each time she chose momentary comfort over lasting truth, each refusal to seek help when it was offered, contributed to the deepening abyss. She knew, somewhere deep down, that she was complicit in her own suffering, and that knowledge only compounded her feelings of guilt and helplessness. She felt trapped in a self-made prison, the keys seemingly lost forever. She had reached a point where she could not even imagine a way out. The darkness was so complete, so absolute, that the concept of light, of joy, of peace, was a faded memory, almost an illusion. She had exhausted every last bit of her own strength, her own will. Her self-help efforts had failed repeatedly. She was, in every agonizing sense of the word, truly lost. Lost in her regrets, lost in her shame, lost in the overwhelming, suffocating darkness of her own soul. I remember Sarah describing that particular day. It was, she said, no different from countless other days in that long, bleak period. The same crushing weight on her chest, the same inescapable sense of hopelessness. She was alone in her small apartment, the curtains drawn, the silence heavy and oppressive. She was wrestling with the familiar demons of regret and self-condemnation, the relentless voices in her mind recounting her failures, replaying her worst moments. She had reached a point of utter exhaustion, a place where she had no fight left. She had stopped pleading, stopped hoping, stopped even looking for a way out. She had, in her heart, resigned herself to this existence, this perpetual twilight of the soul. There was no more fight, no more resistance, just a deep, aching weariness. She was sitting slumped in an old armchair, the room barely lit by a single, dusty lamp, the silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. She felt utterly and completely isolated, disconnected from everything and everyone. It was in that moment, that precise moment of absolute surrender, of complete powerlessness, that something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not a flash of lightning or a booming voice from the heavens. No, it was subtle. It was quiet. It was like a gentle, unseen hand reaching out through the dense fog, a whisper in the storm that only her spirit could hear. It wasn't a voice she heard with her ears, but a deep, profound knowing that resonated in the very core of her being. It was a feeling of being seen, truly seen, not with judgment or condemnation for all her mistakes, but with an overwhelming, unconditional, and inexplicable sense of love and acceptance. It was as if a small, warm light had suddenly ignited in the deepest, most broken recesses of her heart, and its gentle radiance began to push back the shadows that had taken up residence there for so long. I wish I possessed the words, the eloquence, to fully explain this miraculous moment when Grace found Sarah. It wasn't something she had been actively seeking in that moment. It certainly wasn't something she had earned through good deeds or fervent prayers. And it was absolutely not something she felt worthy of. It was simply there, a gift, unmerited, unexpected, a profound sense of peace, a peace that truly surpassed all understanding, began to wash over her. It was a quiet, unshakable assurance that she was not alone in that room, that she was not forgotten, that even in this deep, self-made darkness, she was profoundly and unconditionally loved. It felt, she said, like a massive, crushing weight had been physically lifted from her chest. The relentless tightness in her shoulders began to ease. The chaotic, cruel chatter of negative thoughts that had tormented her for so long began to quiet down, fading into the background like a distant, forgotten hum. And for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever. She felt a tiny, fragile, yet undeniable spark of hope, glowing softly in the overwhelming darkness. Now, let me be clear, this was not a sudden fix. This was not a magic wand that instantly erased all her problems, all her past mistakes. The real-world consequences of her past actions still remained. The path ahead was still uncertain, still challenging. But something fundamental, something foundational, had profoundly changed within her. The darkness had not vanished completely in that instant, but it no longer held her captive in its cold, unforgiving grip. A light had entered the prison of her soul. And that light, my friends, was the undeniable, unmerited, unbelievable grace of God. In that single, sacred moment, Jacob finally understood a truth that had eluded her her entire life. She understood that grace isn't about us being good enough or perfect or deserving of favor. It's about God's relentless, unconditional love reaching for us, especially when we are at our most imperfect, our most broken, our most lost. It's about God taking the initiative to seek us out, to throw us a lifeline when we are drowning in the sea of our own mistakes and have no strength left to even cry for help. The days, weeks, and months that followed that encounter were not suddenly easy. This was not the end of her story, but truly the beginning of a new, redemptive chapter. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the old, familiar shadows threatened to creep back in, whispering their familiar lies. But now, there was a profound difference. Sarah knew, with a certainty that went deeper than her fleeting feelings, that she was not alone. She had experienced the tangible, real presence of grace, and that memory, that truth, became an anchor for her soul in the storms that inevitably still came. She began to take small, hesitant steps towards the light. She started praying again, not out of a sense of religious duty or obligation, but out of a newfound, heartfelt sense of gratitude and a burgeoning hope. She cautiously, humbly, reached out to some of the people she had pushed away, and was met not with anger or judgment, but with a forgiveness and support that humbled her to her core. She started reading the scriptures again, and the ancient stories of redemption, of second chances, of God's unwavering love for the broken, resonated with a depth and personal meaning they never had before. It was as if she was reading them for the very first time, with new eyes and a newly opened heart. This wasn't a quick, overnight transformation. It was a gradual healing process. It was a long, slow journey of allowing that grace, that light she had encountered, to work its way into all the broken, wounded places in her life. She learned, through experience, that her failures were not final. She learned that her mistakes did not define her ultimate worth or destiny. And she learned, perhaps most powerfully of all, that God's love is a relentless, pursuing love, a love that will chase us down even when we are trying our best to hide in the deepest, darkest corners of our own making. The day Grace found Sarah was the ultimate turning point in her life, a distinct line drawn in the sand of her existence. It was the day she finally realized that all her own efforts to save herself, to escape the darkness, were ultimately futile. It was the day she learned that true freedom comes not from our own strength or our own goodness or our own perfect performance, but from surrendering to the loving, open arms of a grace we did absolutely nothing to earn. It was the day she understood that even in our deepest, most profound despair, we are never, ever beyond the reach of God's infinite, transformative love. My dear friends, I share Sarah's story with you today, in all its raw, honest detail, because I know, I truly know in my heart, that many of you listening right now may be in your own season of darkness. You may be carrying burdens of guilt that feel far too heavy to bear. You may be haunted by shame or regret that whispers lies about your worth. You may feel lost and completely alone, wondering if there is any way out of the pit you find yourself in. And I want you to hear this loud and clear, echoing from the depths of Sarah's experience. Just as grace found her in her darkness, it can, and it will, find you in yours. You do not have to clean yourself up first. You do not have to earn it. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to have all the answers. All that is required is a flicker of willingness, a tiny opening in your heart to the possibility that there is a love that surpasses your understanding, a grace that transcends all your mistakes, a light that can and will penetrate even the deepest darkness you have ever known. Perhaps this very day, this very moment, as you listen to these words, is that day for you. Perhaps today, in the midst of your struggle, you will feel that same gentle breeze, that quiet knowing, that overwhelming sense of being loved and accepted, just as you are, broken pieces and all. Perhaps today is the day that grace finds you, right where you are, in the midst of your darkness. I invite you now, just open your heart to it. Allow it to touch you. Allow it to begin to heal you. Allow it to guide you, one small, courageous step at a time, towards the light. Because the beautiful, eternal truth is this: you are not alone. You are loved beyond measure. And grace is always reaching, always seeking, always waiting to find you. Let us pray.